ask the Lord's blessing on the service. Heavenly Father, we come again on this Wednesday night seeking your help. Open our understanding in the things that we will hear from your word, to be with the needs that are brought to you in our prayer requests. Lord, we pray that you'd use every aspect of the service, be with the teen class, the young people and the Kids for Truth, and just pray that you'd use all aspects for your glory now. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, you may be seated.
Let's turn to 111. 111, Silent Night.
Well, I'd like to welcome you to Faith Baptist Church on this 11th of December. Hope you had a good first part of the week. How about somebody with something they'd like to thank the Lord for this evening? Denise? All right. Thank the Lord for safe travel for Matthew. Okay. Got to go birthday shopping. All right. Matthew.
Thank
Glad to be home. All right. Okay, Griff, what do you got? All right. Thank the Lord for times and you can go swimming. You can just carry that praise out for a whole year. It's all right. Micah.
I'm just, once again, really thankful to work for just a good company that a lot of time treats things as learning experiences versus just really quick hold your feet to the fire. They're the ones who support you and actually help you learn instead of punish you for the smallest mistakes. So I'm really thankful I work for a good company with a good team.
So the key to the thanks is that you're not punished for your mistakes. Thank the Lord for good employers. All right. Well, just a few announcements. Things finishing out the week. Tomorrow evening visiting at 7, and then on Friday caroling at 6 o'clock. Yeah.
It is at Edgewood Vista.
So that's north end of Jackrabbit, right-hand side if you're going north. I can't remember what the cross street is there, but if you get lost, give us a call. All right, and then Sunday service is Sunday school at 10, morning service at 11, and then Christmas cantata practice is it just one more Sunday, and then next Sunday night is the program, so got to be there. 4:45, evening service at 6. So those things finishing out the week. All right, we'll have the ushers come. We'll get ready to take the offering. All right, well, let's ask the Lord's blessing on it. Heavenly Father, once again, we seek your blessing on the offering. Thank you for your provision of health and ability and jobs that, Lord, we can provide for the families as well as just your work. Bless now the offering in Jesus' name. Young people for those specials. All right, we'll let the kids be dismissed and teens as well. And we'll go to the book of John in chapter 13. John 13. as we continue through each chapter of John, a portrait of Christ. And tonight the portrait is Jesus, the humble servant. This is the night before Christ is going to be crucified. So coming on the last evening of his earthly ministry. I don't know, there's no way to really know, but you wonder if it was difficult. I mean, granted, knowing you're going to the cross, that in itself is difficult. But ending the earthly ministry on the human side, no matter what, when, last days of anything, there's mixed emotions. Obviously, in college, your last day, there's excitement that you're done, in a sense, with your formal education. But at the same time, there's mixed emotion because there's a lot of folks there you enjoy seeing on a regular basis. There's activities, and all of a sudden that's done. It's a difficult thing. I know various pastors said, the last service, they know physically they can't keep going. That's the reality of it. But to say, this is the last service, and I'm done, as far as my formal ministry, there's mixed emotions. So I don't know. Christ being all man, but all God at the same time, it's hard to really comprehend really what the feelings would be, what his... But we find in that last evening, he has the high, what is labeled the high priestly prayer for God's people, teaching his disciples for the last time, the Passover meal, and then being betrayed by one of the 12. There's a lot of different things going on. Through all this, Jesus knows that in the morning he'll be headed to Calvary. Sometimes not knowing what's going to happen in the morning is a blessing. But Christ knew it all. One lesson that he wanted to push across to his disciples is that he did not come to be served, but to be a servant to others. Keeping in mind, as a sidelight of Christ's ministry, we know the cross was always the ultimate goal, the payment of mankind's sin debt. But all of the things that he did as an example, it's for our benefit. I was thinking today, that would definitely put, your children, every one of them's different. And sometimes, maybe none of you ever, and I can't recall ever saying it, but I've heard people say it, you should be more like your older brother or your older sister. Why can't you be neat like so-and-so? Can you imagine Jesus's family? We got perfection here. Man, talk about a tough road to go down. His brothers, man, I can't keep up with that guy. He's always perfect. That would be a whole unique experience in and of itself, being in the home of Christ. Bible tells us in Mark chapter 10 and verse number 45, for even the Son of Man came not to be ministered unto, but to minister, and to give his life a ransom for many. The last lesson that Christ brings forward is he wanted his disciples to be ministers or servants. We find in verse number 1 of chapter 13, the Bible says, now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour was come that he should depart out of this world unto the Father, having loved his own which were in the world, he loved them unto the end. No matter what, on the human spectrum, when you love as Christ, and obviously his love was pure, there would add an element of difficulty being the last day, the last teaching. Verse number 2, the supper being ended, the devil having now put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he was come from God and went to God, he riseth up from supper and laid aside his garments and took a towel and girded himself. So whatever attire, he took on the attire of a servant. I would imagine that Christ, if the disciples were anything like I think they would be, that they would want Christ to look his best as often as possible. So I would suspect his garments reflected an element of authority, an element of respect, demanding respect. I don't figure his pants had holes being wore out. I don't think that would be the picture, at least in my mind, of how the disciples would allow Christ to be. And so he took off those garments and put on the garments of the servant. So we find the portrait of Christ, the humble servant. First of all, we look at the work of the servant. The work of the servant. The work of the servant in this case, as God's teaching, is a work of love. Verse number 1, we saw it. It concluded with, he loved them unto the end, having loved his own that were in the world. Those physical relationships that he had, and obviously primarily with the disciples, but we also know Lazarus and his family. There was some close ties there, so it wasn't just the disciples. It was probably a cumulative. You think about all those that Christ performed miracles for, not only the individuals, but for their children or their Peter's mother-in-law. So there's a lot of people that would have, but his efforts, or what he wanted us to learn, is a humble servant is one that acts out of love. Right? The key is God's love. God's love is even without reciprocation. We're very aware that human love, even at its best, hinges on some reciprocation. We can feel it in our own heart. When nothing is coming back it's more difficult, and our push to do out of our love for that one is strained, if not diminished. Why? Because human love is balanced by something coming back in acknowledging they love me as well, and that bouncing off of one another is what even in the, there's people in the world that husband and wives that live a marriage that is, in the eyes of man, a great marriage for 50, 60 years and don't ever know the love of God because they've learned to continue to, it's a give and take to build each other's love for one another. But Christ saying, hey, this humble servant is one that loves and will do regardless of what comes. And you say, how am I supposed to ever do that? It's only through the love of God. God gives us love for those that we may know or that we might not know. We find the work of a humble servant. We find the life of this humble servant came to die. Paul described his ministry is it's crucified with Christ. It's a complete setting oneself aside. So the life of Christ, he knew he came to die, but what he's showing forth to us is our self needs to be set aside. Again, that is a difficult thing for a fleshly being like us. To set myself 100% aside and do it 100% for the Lord, regardless of what comes back my way. Only God can help us in doing that, but Christ gave us that example. He accomplished everything to this point but the cross, but that was the goal. The cross is coming. It's coming tomorrow. The ultimate purpose is now before him. He came to die. But we also find the work of a humble servant is a matter of labor. Labor. Verse number 4, the Bible says, he riseth up from supper and laid aside his garments and took a towel and girded himself, and after that he poureth water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet, to wipe them with the towel wherein he was girded. Typically, a hired servant would be one that would do this. It was a gesture of hospitality. When people visited your house, you provided some means. If you couldn't hire a servant, there was a means where you could wash your feet. It was just a common courtesy, but also for the one doing it, we're talking filthy feet. There was no asphalt, there was no concrete. We're talking dirt, and if it was rainy at all, and for you to be the one that gets to wash feet. Now, maybe that would not be a big deal to a lot of people. But on the other hand, it would be considered a job. No, thank you. I don't want to do that. But this servant that would be assigned this as his duty, like it or not, when it's your duty or your job, there's things that we do on a job that if you were given a list, just check the things that you would like to do. That wouldn't be checked. We'd say, you know what, let somebody else do that. But we find that who do you figure would be at least in our minds, the hardest feet to wash? The feet of Judas, I think. You're knowing. You know the beginning from the end, and you're washing the feet of a guy that is going to betray you tonight for just 30 pieces of silver, which wasn't a huge amount of money. For up to 3 years, he traveled with you, did everything, was a trusted member of the disciples, so much so that nobody questioned, nobody said, it's got to be Judas. Even when Christ, and we find he basically tells all the disciples who it is, and yet they're sitting there saying, is it I? Because he was above reproach in their eyes. But Christ knew. And he's giving this gesture of hospitality to that guy. So God's painting a picture of the work of a humble servant isn't an easy one by any stretch. But it's one that God is showing us ought to be part of our life. But then we find the word of the humble servant. Verse number 6. Then cometh he to Simon Peter, and Peter saith unto him, Lord, dost thou wash my feet? Peter is one that had not learned to put a filter on. It just blurts out whatever he's thinking, and sometimes it's applauded in a sense by the other disciples that said, ain't a chance I would say that. But Peter says it without thought, and quickly we find Jesus answered and said unto him, what I do thou knowest not now. You don't understand completely, but thou shalt know hereafter. Peter saith unto him, thou shalt never wash my feet. Jesus answered him, if I wash thee not, thou hast no part with me. Whoa, pump the brakes here. Wait a second, what did I say? Maybe I need to rephrase, maybe I need to correct. We have a word of the humble servant. First of all, we have the word of Simon. Peter's shocked. The Lord washed my feet? No, my feet are going to be too dirty. What is being illustrated or helping us to see, is any life too dirty for the Lord to wash? No. Though through the years, I know I've talked to maybe a handful of people, and I believe they were sincere, saying, you know what, you don't know my life. And obviously I didn't. They said, you know what, I've got too much sin. I've lived too wickedly. God could never save me. But that's not true according to God's word. There is not an individual that has crossed a line of too much sin. And so when Peter said, Lord, washing my feet, you know my life. Christ, we find Peter's stubbornness, refusing to submit to the Lord. Submission is an avenue of fellowship. And so when he said, you would have none of me, Peter's already saved. God's not throwing Peter overboard and saying, okay, Peter, that was the last straw, you're done. He was saying our fellowship is based on our submission. Our submission to the Lord will either increase our fellowship or decrease it. And we find ultimately, as Christ speaks to Peter, we find Peter's submission, the rebuke of the, quickly swings the pendulum the other way, and Peter basically saying, okay, wash me all over. But Christ responds in verse number 10, he that is washed, meaning he that's put their trust in Christ, their sins are washed completely already. He goes on, not to save his feet. Our feet is a picture of the direction, our progress of life, where we're going. We can go places that are dirty and get our feet dirty. That hinders fellowship. And so God is telling Peter, we've got to keep the direction of our life clean. But as we stumble off the right way, wade out into the mud, we can have the Lord wash our feet or restore that fellowship. And so we have the one word of Simon, but the word for all saints is when one receives Christ, he's washed all over. But as we travel a life, we need will occasionally find ourselves needing the fellowship restored by the washing of our feet or the direction of our life. And 1 John chapter 1, 7 through chapter 2 and verse number 2 is illustrative of that very thing. Lastly, we find the wisdom of the humble servant in verse number 12. So after he had washed their feet and had taken his garments and was set down again, he said unto them, know ye what I have done to you? He's wanting them, this is the last lesson. This is the graduating moment as far as his being a teacher and going now to the cross. And as he did other occasions when they were just the 12 of them, understandest thou what I taught? And we'd probably been right there with them the majority of times. Well, yeah, we caught a little bit of it. Can you elaborate? And Christ did. He expounded and taught them what the parables meant. But the wisdom of this of the humble servant, first of all, he's an example, a wise example. Verse number 13, ye call me master and Lord, and ye say, well, for so I am. If then your Lord and master have washed your feet, ye also ought to wash one another's feet. Jesus set the standard. We are to serve one another. And then we find, as you get down to verse number 16, verily, verily, I say unto you, the servant is not greater than his Lord, neither he that is sent greater than he that sent him. Speaking of the Father, he gives an exhortation. Jesus was willing to be a servant at the design of the Heavenly Father. God so loved the world that he gave or sent Christ. So it was a submission act on Christ's part, being part of the Godhead, but yet willing to show submission in that avenue. Then followers ought to be as willing. The expectation, verse number 17. If ye know these things, happy are ye if you do them. The application. An expectation, happiness, or the word happy also it often is translated blessed, blessed by God. It's not just a giddiness, a happy that way, but it's one happy as results, happy in the benefit that's derived to those that you serve. It's something, that kind of happiness, nobody can take away. Why? Because it's within. It's given of God, and that's what he wanted for. May we be more like the Master. All right, Rick.
Let's turn to 305. We'll stand and sing. 305. Deeper and deeper into the heart of Jesus. Deeper and deeper I go. We'll sing the first and the last. Into the heart of Jesus, deeper and deeper I go, seeking to know the reason why he should love me so, why he should stoop to lift me up from the miry clay, saving my soul, making me whole, though I had wandered away into the love of Jesus. Deeper and deeper I go, praising the one who brought me out of my sin and woe, and through eternal ages, gratefully I shall sing. Oh, how he loved, oh, how he loved, Jesus, my Lord and my King. You may be seated.
All right, anybody need a prayer sheet? All right, well, as we look at the